Hello, everyone. This is Betty Meredith, president of the Retirement Resource Center, a retirement education and training company for financial professionals, their clients, and consumers. We're happy to be here today for this webinar, What's New in Retirement Mortgages, an Update for Advisors, with Mary Jo Lafaye and Dr. Barry Sachs as our presenters. So we'd like to start the presentation today with a welcome by Mary Jo Lafaye of Mutual of Omaha Mortgage, which is sponsoring this presentation. So Mary Jo, I'll turn it over to you.
Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. I'm Mary Jo Lafaye with Mutual of Omaha Mortgage, and I'm delighted that you could be here today for our webinar. Barry and I will be presenting for the next 50 minutes, and then we'll have a Q&A for you. So our presentation today is an advisor update on what's new in retirement mortgages, including a strategy for managing spike expenses for retirees. And we'll start with an overview, kind of a review for people that haven't used a reverse mortgage or retirement mortgage recently, just to get you up to speed on the basics. And then we're going to go over what's new. And then Barry will present his recent and latest research on managing spike expenses, which is really great. And there's also a handout on that if you'd like to dig deeper.
All right. Thank you, Mary Jo. And just to give you a little background on Barry and Mary Jo, Dr. Barry Sachs brings a wealth of experience with a PhD in semiconductor physics from MIT and JD Harvard Law School. And he was a certified specialist in taxation, spent 35 years as an ERISA attorney, and his expertise, along with the innovative work of his brother, Stephen Sachs, has led to groundbreaking insights on the role of reverse retirement mortgages in retirement income planning. And Mary Jo is a certified home equity income specialist who helps those ages 55 and over unlock the greater freedom through their strategic management of their largest assets, housing wealth. So Mary Jo has been providing educational CE courses for over 2 decades. So Mary Jo and Barry, I will now turn it over to you.
Thank you. So as I mentioned, we're going to quickly go through a little review for anybody who is not as familiar with the programs that we offer. We're going to talk about a brief review of the retirement mortgage features, structure, qualifying, triggers when they become due, and loan options. And then we'll talk about what's new in this program lineup. And then Barry will talk about spike expenses. And then we'll go over a couple of use examples to give you an idea of real world uses of these loans and how they can help you manage your retirees' portfolio. So product overview, types of reverse mortgages that are available today. We have the FHA home equity conversion mortgage that makes up about 90% of the loans that are done nationwide. It's referred to as an HECM or HECM. And that requires the borrower to be 62 years old. But if they have a spouse that is eligible, they can be a non-borrowing spouse and still have the same protections to stay in the home for their lifetime with no repayment. So that's a new-ish feature, but not in the lineup of 2026 new features. These loans are available as a fixed rate, meaning you'd refinance a home you already own to get a fixed rate lump sum draw. Or you can get a credit line, and we're going to go into depths later about the credit line and all the features surrounding that, which is an extremely useful planning tool for advisors. That's an adjustable rate mortgage. And then there's the purchase loan, which not many people know that you can actually use these loans to purchase a home. And that's ideal for people that are downsizing, and maybe they don't want to use all their cash from their sale of their larger home because they'd like to invest some of that. Or potentially they don't have enough to buy the next home that they want. So they can use this as a purchase loan with minimal income and credit requirements and not have to make a monthly payment. Pretty groundbreaking use of these loans. We also have the proprietary, also called jumbo loans. And for those, you only have to be 55 years old. So these are ideal for people that need liquidity earlier in life. Maybe they're retiring early due to health reasons. Maybe they're getting a divorce and they need liquidity to buy out a spouse or start a business. They've become unemployed without really planning to be unemployed that time in their life. So a lot of uses, again, available as a fixed rate and adjustable rate line of credit or a purchase. And previous to now, all retirement mortgage loans were required to be first position loans, meaning that you had to refinance the loan that you currently have on your home if you have one. But that's one of the changes that we're going to talk about in our lineup of new features. So I'm going to start with a few misconceptions about these loans. Number one misconception, And this is really nationwide, applies to advisors, professionals, consumers. The borrower gives up title, and that's a no. The borrower retains title and can sell or refinance at any time with no prepayment penalty. And that's a federal guideline. So that applies to all retirement mortgages. You can owe more than the house is worth, and that's a big no also. When the loan becomes due, the homeowner can never owe more than the value of the home, and that's the appraised value at the time. Any remaining equity belongs to the borrower and their estate. The heirs may retain the home by paying the lesser of the loan balance or 95% of the appraised value. So even in the rare cases when a borrower may end up owing much more than the home value, the estate can still keep the home by just paying 95% of the appraised value. And that's a pretty nice feature and protection for heirs who do want to keep the home for whatever reason. And the third one we're going to talk about is you may have to move. Some people believe that when you've used up all the proceeds available to you in one of these loan programs, you have to sell the house and move. And that's also untrue. You do have the right as a borrower to live in the home for the rest of their life with zero repayment as long as they abide by loan terms, which includes paying their property charges as they would do if they had no loan at all, and maintaining the home and living in it as their primary residence. So as long as they're doing those things, the loan never comes due, no matter how much they owe, and even if their home value goes down significantly during the time they have the loan. And then also people think that you can't make mortgage payments. And actually, I get calls pretty frequently from people that inherit money or they sell a vacation home and they want to pay down their retirement loan balance. You can make a payment of any amount at any time, again, with no prepayment penalty. And if it's an adjustable rate credit line program that you've signed up for, then that entire credit line plus all the growth becomes available for you to borrow again in the future, perhaps for long-term care or other spike expenses. So the retirement mortgage guidelines, I'm going to do a quick review of kind of just the nuts and bolts of how these loans are structured, the dynamics of the loan. They're non-recourse, meaning the borrower and their estate have no personal liability to repay these loans. And that applies to the FHA and the proprietary. So even though the proprietary loans are not federally insured, they are federally regulated, and they do follow most of the same guidelines. There's zero monthly prepayment required until a triggering event, which would be if the last remaining borrower moves, sells, passes away, or if they could stop abiding by loan terms. Like, let's say they move out of the house and turn it into an Airbnb, then the loan's going to be due. They would need to refinance it to a different type of loan. Draws are non-taxable. Of course, consult your tax advisor, but the IRS does define the money that comes from these loans as loan proceeds because they are loan proceeds. Financial assessment, minimal income and credit requirements, meaning most people will qualify based on their Social Security, but we do look at the overall picture to guarantee as best we can that they're going to be able to meet those requirements of continuing to pay their property tax, homeowners insurance, maintenance, utilities, and HOA dues if they have a homeowners association. If there's enough in the loan proceeds to help them do that, that also can help them apply. So we can do a drawdown of assets, income, Social Security, pension, and loan proceeds can help them qualify. So most people qualify. Single family homes are eligible for these loans, as are 1 to 4 unit buildings, as long as the borrower lives in one of the units. That is a requirement on all retirement loans. It requires occupancy as a primary residence, and that's a really important feature. So we do verify that. Townhomes are okay. Approved condos, we can either get them the complex FHA approved or single unit approval, depending on the situation. Primary residence is fine, even if they have an ADU. I've had a main home with multiple units, and it could be an ADU, a junior accessory dwelling unit, and that's fine. And we're going to talk about a new feature related to that also when we get to the new lineup. Occupying one portion, and they can rent the other portion, but no short-term rentals. So it's fine to rent part of your house. You can have a roommate, rent a cottage, whatever you want to do, but no short-term rentals and no, typically no business use. Like you can't turn the cottage into an antique store or a wedding venue or something like that. The borrower and their estate are entitled to all future appreciation subject to repayment of the loan balance when the loan comes due. Just like with conventional lending, there's no appreciation sharing and no annuity purchase required. A little bit more about the FHA program. So the FHA program is called the Home Equity Conversion Mortgage, or HECM. This is an FHA insured plan for people 62 and over. The spouse can be younger than 62 if they're eligible, meaning they live in the home at the time of application. This allows them to convert home equity into accessible funds without demands on cash flow. In other words, without having to calculate how they're going to repay that on a monthly basis. The borrower retains ownership and can sell or refinance at any time or pay down the loan balance with any amount at any time, completely flexible, and then borrow that money back again if they need to. The property can be held in trust. The trust does need to be reviewed by legal and title for approval. Almost all trusts are approved as long as the borrowers have the power to borrow and encumber, but we do send that in just to check. And the power of attorney, financial power of attorney, can be used as long as we have a doctor's letter stating that that financial power of attorney was executed when the borrower had full capacity. Eligible property types, we've already gone over that. Certain unique types, log homes, modular homes, barn dominiums, are approved on a case-by-case basis if we can find comparable sales. Not eligible would be co-ops, properties in a lava zone, coastal barrier resource system. Those are very, very rare. I don't think I've actually ever encountered any of those in my 23 years. So the FHA credit line, just to give you a sample of how much people could initially qualify for, the initial available proceeds at various ages based on home value of $1,250,000, that's the 2026 max claim amount. In other words, that's the amount that they use to determine the maximum someone could borrow if their home value is that high. If their home value is lower, they would get a loan to value percentage or ratio of their home value based on their age and the interest rate at the time of application. So assuming a max home value of $1,250,000 or more, the 62-year-old today could borrow around $400,000, and this changes week to week based on interest rates. 72-year-old could borrow $475,000, 82-year-old could borrow around $600,000, and a 92-year-old could borrow around $775,000. And if you're able to stay till the end of the presentation, we'll be able to show you how those credit lines increase in value every month as the borrower ages, even if their home value does not increase. So it's a guaranteed growth rate on the FHA credit line, not based on appreciation, but based solely on age. And the one thing that's given in retirement is that people will get older every month. So receiving the tax-free funds as needed, meaning you can just use a line of credit and draw any amount from it that you need as you go through your retirement years as a buffer asset to cover anything that comes up. You can supplement your monthly income with a 10-year or lifetime guaranteed monthly payment. So based on your age and how much you can qualify for in the beginning, we can determine how much you could get each month guaranteed for life, no matter how long you live. So even if you far outlive your life expectancy, guaranteed by HUD, you will get that check every month for as long as you live in the home. A term payment, perhaps somebody needs $15,000 a month and they're only planning on staying in the home for another 5 years or so, and then they're going to move to assisted living or move in with family or downsize. Then we can set up a term payment for that amount that they need monthly, and they'll get a check in their checking account every month. And then lump sum draw. You can take a lump sum at closing or anytime during the loan, the term, and you can also do any combination. So you could take some money at closing to pay off a mortgage, maybe to do some home repairs, remodeling, buy a car, add solar, and then also get a line of credit for to use as a buffer asset for market volatility, and get a lifetime payment. So you can combine all these to really suit your needs. And the greatest thing is you can change this payment plan anytime you need, as many times as you need to for the life of the loan based on your needs at any given time. Minimal credit and income requirements. We just have to show that you have enough ongoing income to pay your property charges, maintenance, and utilities. If someone cannot qualify, then we can set aside some of their loan proceeds to pay those things for them. Or if they have a history of paying those charges late, we would also set aside an amount of money, and the lender would disperse their property tax and homeowners insurance on their behalf until that fund runs out, which usually aligns with their life expectancy. Payment triggers. So the loan is due when the last remaining borrower moves, sells, or passes away, or if they violate loan terms, like they start using the house as an Airbnb. There's no transient or hotel or business use typically allowed. There is a little bit of leeway on the proprietary loans for business use. If they stop paying their property charges. Flood insurance is required if they're in a flood zone. So the protections for the non-borrowing spouse, if they're on title and they want to stay in the home after the passing of the borrowing spouse, if for some reason they're too young to qualify, but they're married and living in the home, then we can offer protections for the non-borrowing spouse as well. So one of the features that a lot of people don't realize is, I mentioned this before, you can use these loans to purchase your next home when you're downsizing. So this is a tool to reposition retirement assets for better financial outcomes. Downsizing, right sizing, wiping out a monthly payment on their existing home when they sell, free up more cash to invest if they need to beef up their nest egg, their investment portfolio to create more income, lower their draw rate from their portfolio by getting rid of a mortgage payment, and getting into their next house without taking on a new mortgage payment, and potentially without using all the sale proceeds from their current home. So one of the new features in 2026 is that FHA now allows up to 6% seller concessions, meaning that the seller can contribute up to 6% of the sales price to the borrower for covering closing costs and all sorts of things. So that's one of the new features. Here's an example of a couple, Dan and Linda, sell their existing home for $2.1 million. They wipe out a huge mortgage of $850,000. They pay sale fees and staging, prep on the house of $150,000. So they walk away from that sale of their family home with $1.1 million. And then they want to buy a new home for 1.3. The HECM purchase loan will pay $461,000 at the close of escrow towards that purchase. So this is completely separate from the sale of their former home. They're out in the market buying a new home. They want to spend 1.3, but they only have 1.1 million. They don't want to take on a mortgage payment. They don't want to take money from their invested assets. So we can provide a retirement loan as a purchase tool to help them buy that next home. $461,000 goes towards the $1.3 million purchase, and the $839,000 remaining purchase money comes from their $1.1 million in cash. And that leaves them $261,000 additional money left over from the sale of their home to buy their next property, and they have not taken on a mortgage payment, and they wiped out a large monthly payment on their former home. So this is a great example. We also help people who are upsizing. I've recently had clients moving from LA to Petaluma. They were selling a home for $1.8 million, paying off a mortgage, paying some capital gain taxes, paying sale fees, and the new home they wanted to buy in Petaluma was also $1.8 million. So they needed to supplement their down payment funds, and we were able to do that for them. Also had another client moving from Tennessee to Sonoma, from a fairly low area, a low home price area of Tennessee to the wine country. So he was spending about double the amount he was selling his home in Tennessee for, and we were able to help him buy his next home, again, without taking money out of investments and without taking on a mortgage payment. Florida to Tiburon. I had a gentleman recently who had left Marin and gone to Florida and now wants to come back. So we're going to be able to help him with about $1 million contribution towards a $3 million purchase. And again, no mortgage payment will be required. So the secure equity proprietary, that's the loan I was just talking about, where we can loan up to $4 million, age 55 and over. So this is the one you don't have to be 62, you only have to be 55. Same minimal credit and income requirements. It is a higher interest, but there's no mortgage insurance premium due because it's not FHA insured. However, it is federally regulated. It allows people to get much greater liquidity if they have a high value home. Also fully non-recourse to the borrower and their estate. And again, 1 to 4 units are approvable, or approved condos, townhomes, planned unit developments, but you must occupy 1 unit. So some of the secure equity loan options, there are 2 programs available. There's the fixed rate, which requires a one-time draw. and that's it. There's no credit line attached to that, but it is a fixed interest rate. We just had a reduction in the interest rate on that program, so I'm happy to prepare a comparison for anybody that wants to see how those payouts look. Secure equity adjustable rate mortgage, that's available as a credit line that you can draw from as needed. It has a 10-year draw period, but again, the triggering is not due, meaning the loan doesn't come due until the last remaining borrower moves, sells, or passes away. And that could be 30 years, 40 years, whenever that occurs. So this adjustable rate mortgage offers a large line of credit, ongoing access for the 10-year draw period. You can refinance after that if you need more money, if they qualify. They must draw a minimum of 25% of the available proceeds at closing, and the rest could be a credit line. Usually they need that to pay off an existing mortgage. These loans are great for people that are paying $20,000 or $30,000 a month for in-home care, and they have a $3 or $4 million home. We can cover the cost of that care for years without them having to take on a payment or without them having to take money out of their taxable accounts. The line of credit does increase annually at 1.5% for the first 7 years. The HECM loan proceeds, how loan proceeds can be used. The secure equity, this is our proprietary jumbo product. Funds can be used for nearly anything, paying off an existing mortgage, home repairs and improvements, building an ADU, buying a second home, in-home care, a spouse's care home, increasing financial flexibility. So this gives you a little idea of how these loans can pay out. So how much can you borrow from Mutual of Omaha's proprietary secure equity jumbo loan? The maximum you can borrow is $4 million. So the initial available proceeds at various ages, we did a little chart for you, and this is based on a home value of $6 million, but we can do homes much higher value than that. I've done the largest home value I did was 13 million, another one at 9 million, 10 million. So these borrowers with significant home equity do have needs for cash-free cash, non-taxable cash. So here's based on a home value of 6 million and a 55-year-old borrower, they could borrow around $2 million. 65-year-old borrower, a little over 2.2 million. 75-year-old borrower, around 2.6, and an 85-year-old borrower, more than 50% at 3,229,000. And these numbers fluctuate based on the interest rate you choose and just what the lender is offering at any given time. So it's always good to check when you want an idea what somebody can borrow. Those do change. We get a weekly update on our rate sheet every Tuesday, and the rates can affect how much people can borrow. So now we're going to talk about what's new in these retirement loans, because there are constantly being changes made, improvements, more protections, better programs, more flexibility. The second position loan is really the big news, and I have a lot of people taking advantage of this today. If you have a client whose HELOC is recasting, or maybe a first or second mortgage is recasting, I just helped a client who had an interest-only HELOC and the payment was $1,100 a month. It recast to a high interest rate, and the principal and interest payment was $2,800 a month. So his monthly demands on that HELOC went from $1,100 a month to $2,800 a month, completely unaffordable. We were able to step in and pay off that HELOC with a second place reverse mortgage, and he was able to keep his 2.6% fixed rate first mortgage in place. This was really, really important for him to be able to keep his home and not have to take more money out of his investments accounts in his late 60s. So new claim amount by FHA, that typically goes up every January 1st. This year it went to $1,249,000, which was a significant jump and means people could borrow more money than they could have borrowed a year ago, which is good because everything costs more than it did a year ago. So this is offering much higher payouts than it did in 2025 or any year prior. There's more flexibility on the proprietary jumbo loans. You can now live in your accessory dwelling unit and rent out your main house. Again, not short-term rentals, they have to be 30 days or more, but that's a big shift because in the area where I live in Marin County, you may be able to rent your primary main house for $8,000 or $10,000 a month. And if you're single or just living a simpler life, you can move into your cottage and be comfortable and still not have to make a mortgage payment. a silver divorce or separation, we now have a way that people can access money from their equity without taking money out of their investments and without taking on a mortgage payment to buy out a spouse, even if their divorce is not final yet. So that's big news, because before it was always required that the divorce be final. And now we have a way that we can do that to help people. If some people aren't going to get divorced, I have clients that are they're just living separately, they're separated, they're separating their finances. One wants to buy the other out and keep the house, but they're not actually going to get divorced. So this is really helpful news. So the second position, again, that allows people to keep their low interest first mortgage in place, which can be a huge benefit to their overall financial health in the long term. Gain access to equity reserves for any purpose, including silver divorce, unemployment, healthcare needs, remodel. No need to refinance their current first mortgage. No monthly repayments required, just like all the other loans we offer. Non-recourse, and this loan has particularly low setup fees. So it's not a big outlay for mortgage insurance or anything like that. It's very, very inexpensive to set up the second place loan. The advisor challenge today, clients are living longer than expected. Their unexpected spike expenses are decreasing their overall portfolio, which is their engine to create income for the rest of their life. They've got liquidity issues due to taxable accounts and so forth, market volatility, rising healthcare and care costs, high concentration of their wealth is in their home equity. They're still having a mortgage payment in retirement. Mortgage or HELOCs are recasting to higher rates and higher payments, and they typically cannot qualify to refinance that debt, or they just don't want a big payment. Silver divorce, again, dividing assets in a mutually equitable way without having to, kind of decimate their savings. So the bottom line, traditional portfolios just may not be enough. It's great to know what the alternatives are. And when you look at the cost of doing one of these loans compared to the cost of pulling money out of taxable accounts and the lost opportunity, often it does make a lot of sense. So the traditional assumptions, I'm about to turn it over to Dr. Barry Sachs here for his talk on the spike expenses and his recent research. There is a PDF handout for you that includes his recent research, as well as the slides from this presentation and a summary of the retirement loans. So traditional assumptions, the 4% rule is the framework designed for regular withdrawals from the securities portfolio only. Distributions adjusted annually only for inflation. The limitation is that this does not account for spike expenses. So what happens when somebody needs $85,000 or $100,000 and they hadn't planned on taking that big draw out of their portfolio? There are no distributions. This is assuming no distributions are calculated in the 4% rule for covering spike expenses. So I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Barry Sachs now, and he's going to tell you all about his recent research, and then we're going to do a Q&A at the end. Thank you for sticking with us.
Thank you very much, Mary Jo. As the Monty Python folks said, and now for something completely different. I'm going to talk about spike expenses. And one way to anticipate these expenses is something we're just pushing now. We're just putting out into the world, something that appeared a long time ago. It appeared in our first research well over a decade ago, and it was ignored for good reasons then. And now we've got some new reasons to think we should not only keep it, but look at it, think about it, and in fact, adopt it. So let's start by looking at more recent research, less recent than the reserve strategy, but more recent than the old 4% rule, which I hope everybody is familiar with. That simply says when you're drawing from a portfolio, you draw 4% of the amount that's there in the first year, and every year thereafter, you take the same dollar amount adjusted only for inflation. Well, the coordinated strategy introduces the HECM credit line as the so-called buffer asset. A buffer asset is where you get the money from when the portfolio itself has had negative or even weak returns. So again, the coordinated strategy, as it was presented in what shall I call it? The groundbreaking article of more than 10 years ago, it was 2012, also provides only for constant purchasing power and not for spike expenses. So now we've got this old but new strategy called the reserve strategy, which uses the same HECM credit line, but in a new way to manage the impact of spike expenses. So what's special about the HECM credit line is that once it's established, it's guaranteed to increase the available cash over time, regardless of what happens in the securities market or, for that matter, to the real estate. Once the credit line is established, then this HECM amount grows and grows and grows all by itself without anybody having to do anything. Let's see if we can go to the next slide. By pressing the down item.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, so now let's look at this unique feature and let's look at the reserve strategy. The unique feature, as I mentioned, is the extraordinary guaranteed growth of the amount available from the HECM credit line. The reserve strategy itself involves the earliest possible establishment of the HECM line of credit. By earliest, I mean as soon as possible, at age 62 or at the latest at the outset of retirement. And the earlier it's established, the longer it has to grow. And this is the miracle of compound interest. I think even Einstein talked about this as one of the great mathematical miracles of all time, compound interest. So the reserve strategy, unlike the coordinated strategy, which is there to use the buffer asset whenever the portfolio has had negative returns, the reserve strategy, by contrast, keeps the line of credit in reserve and growing, while the securities portfolio is used to pay all the normal distributions, all the expenses, until it's exhausted. And then once the portfolio of securities is exhausted, then the line of credit, having grown substantially, is available to make all the subsequent distributions. So this is designed to be used in a strategic way, a way that we're looking at now, and not reactively, not to suddenly panic and say, oh my God, we've got a spike expense, we better go into the home equity line of credit. So it should be used in this strategic way, which means a certain amount of restraint and also a certain amount of restrained regular spending, which we'll see we've quantified later in this talk. Okay, so now most of the research on retirement distributions published up to now has focused on this constant purchasing power, annual distributions that are the same each year, adjusted only for inflation, and therefore not reflecting how the market moves up and down securities, and not reflecting any special need when spike needs occur. For example, the roof needs to be fixed or the house will leak. A grandchild has finished college with a tremendous debt, and one way to help out the grandchild might be to pay off some or all of that grandchild's student loans. But those are special expenses, not part of regular expenses, and those are what we're calling spike expenses. So all of the work up to now, the famous 4% introduced by William Bengen in 1994, or the coordinated strategy introduced by myself and my brother, Steve Sachs, who's an economics professor, adding the retirement mortgage line of credit as the buffer asset, which we did in 2012. And then Pete Neuwirth, a very clever actuary, in 2017. All of these articles are in the Journal of Financial Planning. And those of you who actually look at the Journal of Financial Planning will be well advised to at least look at, scan, think about these articles. There's a lot of very good thinking that's gone into them. We're quite proud of the work that's been done. So then, turning now to the spike expenses, there have been some qualitative discussions of providing for occasional additional distributions. And those discussions have often talked about setting up a separate account to pay for those distributions. So there's no real quantitative analysis done, but there's been some thought given to those ways of dealing with the spike expenses. And in fact, one of them, Jonathan Guyton, wrote about setting up a sub-account and telling the client, hey, look, here's the sub account. You got some special expenses. You always come to me and say, just this one time. Well, here's the sub account. You can take out whenever you need it. But once it's used up, you're on your own. So we have to be careful about this kind of approach. So this presentation, what I'm about to show you quantitatively, is, to our knowledge, the first quantitative analysis of how to deal with distributions to meet occasional substantial spike expenses and still maintain cash flow throughout a 30-year retirement. And remember, the important thing once you're retired is you got to maintain that cash flow, because the last thing anybody wants, and I often include it in the slide, although not here, is to have to eat cat food when you're 85 years old because you run out of cash flow. And that's an important thing to think ahead about. And that's what we've done here in a quantitative manner. Okay, so now how large are the spikes we're talking about? Well, we're talking about spikes that are of the order of $75,000 adjusted for inflation. So if they occur later in the retirement, then there'll be $75,000 adjusted for the inflation that has occurred for those years. So the spikes now are in the context of withdrawals from a portfolio that are of initial value. The portfolios of initial value $400,000, and distributions typically start at numbers like 33,000, which, by the way, that's more than 8%. So consider that in the context of a world governed by the 4% rule. If you had a $400,000 portfolio at the outset of retirement, then 4% of that would be 16,000, which is less than half of the 33,000. But in the context of the coordinated strategy, or as we'll show, the reserve strategy, numbers like 33,000 or even $36,000 a year initially, and always growing with inflation, can nonetheless maintain, with a better than 90% probability, a 30-year retirement with constant cash flow. So this will be explained more in the slide on our analytic approach. So let's talk about the slides. This is all done with an example. And we're considering then 2 spikes within a 30-year retirement. Well, if you're considering 2 spikes within a 30-year retirement, there are 30 times 29 different possible combinations of when they can occur. For clarity and for relative simplicity, the spikes we're considering are in just contiguous years. So we've looked at 25 and 26, years 25 and 26, that is deep into a 30-year retirement, years 15 and 16, which is about halfway through a 30-year retirement, and years 5 and 6, which are early in that 30-year retirement. So that's what we're considering. And the analysis is going to occur in the context of a representative retiree who has a securities portfolio at the outset of retirement of $400,000 and a home value at the outset of retirement of $800,000. And this is reasonably typical. That is, we've done some research and we've examined some statistics, and that research and those statistics indicate that typically people reaching age 65, for example, have home value which turns out to be greater than the amount they've saved for retirement through 401ks or rollover IRAs or whatever. So that ratio of 2 to 1 of home value to portfolio value at the outset of retirement is typical. It's quite reasonable. And the analytic approach uses a Monte Carlo simulation to simulate the portfolio's investment performance and to simulate inflation. And the whole analysis occurs with 3 spreadsheets that are run simultaneously. They all use the same simulated investment performance. They use the same inflation-adjusted annual distribution amounts, but they use different strategies for determining the sources of the distributions. And we're going to show you. These are the 3 strategies: the coordinated strategy, the reserve strategy, the last resort strategy. Not yet, we still have to explain them, and then we'll move on. The coordinated strategy is the one we published way back in 2012. That one says, come January of each year, look back at the previous year and see how well the portfolio did. If the portfolio did well, then you draw this year's distribution from the portfolio. If the portfolio did badly last year, then you draw from the line of credit, the retirement. I call it reverse mortgage, but I know that the new term is retirement mortgage, from the retirement mortgage line of credit. The reserve strategy is the one that is new or newly discovered as having value. That's the one where the reserve, the line of credit is established as early as possible, as I mentioned before, and maintained in reserve, and all of the draws throughout the early part of retirement are taken from the portfolio until it's exhausted. And during that time, the line of credit has grown and grown and grown, taking advantage of compound interest. And that's guaranteed, and it occurs no matter what else. The last resort strategy is the one that had been looked at for a long time as, well, we'll wait and see what happens. And if we run out of money drawing from the portfolio, if we've taken, for example, more than 4%, or if the spikes have hit early, whatever, then we'll establish the line of credit, the retirement mortgage line of credit. But establishing it later is just what you don't want to do, because if you do it, what happens? It hasn't had the chance to grow. If it hasn't had the chance to grow, it's not there available to pay out what needs to be drawn during the course of one's retirement, including the years when there are spending spikes. Okay, now we can go to the next. So there are advantages and disadvantages of them. The coordinated strategy has the advantage of providing a good balance between lowering the risk of cash flow exhaustion and still leaving some legacy bequest. The reserve strategy is the one we are advocating now because it provides the lowest risk of cash flow exhaustion, but it has the least amount of legacy or bequest amount. Moreover, it's been ignored in the past because people are reluctant to consider establishing a reverse mortgage, a retirement mortgage, and incurring the upfront fees and not expecting to get any benefit from it for approximately 14 years. And I'll show you where the 14 years comes from. That's roughly the time it takes, on average, the median, if ever, to exhaust the portfolio. But considering the results that are presented here, those upfront costs, which are not out of pocket, by the way, can be considered an insurance premium against the risk of spike expenses. And that's important. This is an insurance premium. It's relatively cheap insurance, and it doesn't come out of pocket. And what it is insurance against being wiped out. I call it insurance against having to eat cat food when you're 85 years old. Okay, and the last resort strategy is simply done in the early years of retirement. All cash flow comes from the securities portfolio. And only if and when it's exhausted does the retiree establish the retirement mortgage credit line, and then all subsequent cash flow comes from that. So it's just like the reserve strategy, except established too late. And that's not a good thing. Too late, and it's too late to go back and redo. Okay, so the question is, how long does it take typically to exhaust the portfolio before the reserve, the retirement line of credit, steps in? With the coordinated strategy, essentially in a 30-year retirement, the median is 30 years. In other words, it doesn't even get exhausted at the end of 30 years. That's where the line of credit is used as the buffer asset. The reserve strategy and the last resort strategy both use up the portfolio first, and therefore they'll come out with the same number. And it turns out the median, using our particular example of the $800,000 home value and the $400,000 portfolio and the distribution amount in the 30,000 range, it'll last about 14 years. And that's fine. It turns out, as long as the reserve has been set up early enough to make up in the subsequent years. Now, some retirees won't live for 14 years, or some retirees will have extraordinary good luck with their portfolio, so that it'll be much more than 14 years, if ever, that they ever need to dip into that retirement loan reserve, that line of credit. And here's an illustration of what happens if you start right away at age 62 or 65. How much will that line of credit grow And this graph shows that if it started at 62 or 65, then it'll grow to a number close to 1,600,000. These units are in thousands of dollars. But if you wait till age 79, which is 14 years into retirement, then it will start higher than the others because one is older, but it will only grow in those years to 1,200,000, which means there's a difference of roughly $400,000, which is a substantial reserve that wouldn't be available if the line of credit is established after the portfolio is exhausted rather than at the outset of retirement. That's the crucial point here. The line of credit should be established as early as possible. Yes, that initial cost will become a debt and it will grow over time, but it's an awfully good insurance policy to have. So the analytic approach, continue now, is that for each of the three spreadsheets are the initial distribution amount, the amounts in years of the spikes, and they're automatically adjusted for inflation. And then the results come out in the form of a graph. I'm going to show you what the graph looks like. Here's the graph. Now what we see are 6 lines. We got 2 green lines, 2 blue lines, and 2 red lines. And we've got a dotted green line and a solid green line, a dotted blue line and a solid blue line, and the same with the red. And what do they mean? It means that if we start with an initial distribution amount, this is for spikes at years 15 and 16. Just I chose them because they're right in the middle. Anyway, what you see is if you start with a full amount, that is 36,400, that's the distribution amount that would last 30 years with no spikes. But if you adjust it down a little bit, and we had to do trial and error to do it, then of course the graph goes up. The probability of 30-year cash flow uninterrupted goes up because you're taking less. So what we see is the green dotted line, and the lesser amount in this case, that is for 15 and 16-year spikes of $75,000, we get a 90% probability of cash flow lasting for 30 years if we drop down the distribution from 36,400 to 31,200 as the normal regular distribution, not taking account of spike amounts. So what we've done is we've shown here that the dotted lines are taking money at the rate of this reduced amount. That's simply reducing the regular annual spending, and that enables the spike to be absorbed and still retain a 90% probability of cash flow survival if the reserve strategy is used, because that's the green picture. If you go to the coordinated strategy, that's the blue picture. And already, normally with the coordinated strategy, you get 90%, but we've got a couple of spikes that cause the probability of cash flow to drop to 80%. We're looking at the blue dotted line. And of course, the last resort strategy is a disaster because there's barely a 40% probability of cash flow survival for 30 years, even at the lower rate of 31,200. And if we take the full rate, that is the amount that would give rise under the coordinated strategy to 90%, we're down to 10% probability. Nobody would want to live with only a 10% probability of cash still flowing for a 30-year retirement, because it's cat food probably at age 80 or rather than 85. So this is the way the results are presented by our computer program. And then this is just a table of what happens if the spikes are at different years, at different places in time. So with no spikes, that's that 36,400. And that says we use a 9.10% initial distribution rate. And think about that in the context of a 4% rule. So you get double as much money, assuming there were no spikes. And even if there are spikes, if you're reducing the annual distribution a little bit to 8% or so, way out there, you can still absorb the spikes and you're still getting twice as much money as you would have with the 4% rule. The worst case, of course, is the near-term spikes. And there, we're still ahead of the 4% rule by a full 3%. That's almost 100% increase, so 75% increase over the 4% rule. It says that using a retirement mortgage line of credit in conjunction with the securities portfolio means you've got cash flow with a 90% probability throughout a 30-year retirement. And that's very significant. But remember, it only works if the line of credit is established at the outset. That's so crucial. Okay, so here's the comments. We've done this for other amounts of the spikes as well, and consistent with intuitive expectations, the results show the spending spikes that occur early are, they have a greater impact than those in later years. That was obvious from that table we just showed. And the amount of decrease in the regular spending necessary to retain that 90% probability of 30-year cash flow is, it's not colossal. It takes some financial discipline. It's something the financial planners should impart to their clients. And once understood, I think there's a tremendous benefit. So basically, that's what planners should know, and that's what planners should do. Great. Take it away. Mary Jo.
Okay. Great. So I think here are the takeaways. I think it's probably a good time to open it up to questions.
All right. Do you want me to hop in now with questions? Yeah. All right. Okay. So now it's time to enter in questions that you might have. And I did have a couple, as hard I wrote them down. Thank you, Barry, for one of the slides that you had on the growth of the credit line compared to opening it earlier versus later, because I was sitting there wondering about the what the difference by the time the line of credit is growing, that interest rate, and the fact that you get more access to credit the longer you wait. I don't know what that percentage per year is. So you showed, showed a slide where it was like 30 some percent at age 62, and by age 67 you get like 36% of the value of the home in the line of credit. So that was great, those slides that you put together there to kind of show that you're still better off taking it as soon as possible. On that note, how does it work with the interest rate in the line of credit growth? Is that varying per year? Is that a fixed rate from the time you start the?
It's a variable. The credit line is a variable rate, and there's the interest rate plus the mortgage insurance premium, which is always 0.5%. Those two together determine how much the charges that will accrue on the loan balance, and it's also equally applied to the credit line. So you can see here in this how the credit line starts at 640 year one, at the end of year one at 684. So that's the interest rate plus the 0.5% MIP being applied to the credit line as a growth rate, and that is a variable just like the interest rate on the loan balance.
Okay, yeah, so you can see it. Go ahead, Barry.
There's two fixed components, and the variable is the third. That is, there's an index, which is the varying component. Okay. Then there's the lender's margin also, and then there's the mortgage insurance premium. And the mortgage insurance premium is fixed at the outset as 0.5% of the amount. And the other piece, the lender's margin, is also fixed at the outset. So it's a sum of three numbers. And that's explained in better detail than I could explain it in Wade Pfau's book on reverse mortgages.
And if anybody would like a copy of that, I have some, so I can mail you one. So this shows here, this is a 62-year-old, which is when Barry's recommending that you set up the credit line with a home value of $1,250,000. So you can see the credit line starts at $396,000. By the 5th year, with the current growth rate, it would be $555,000. By the 10th year, it would be $777,000. And by age 77, they would have $1,088,000 in their credit line if the growth rate stays where it is today. So that just gives you an idea of how that really looks over time, because it's hard to imagine. But that is a guaranteed growth, guaranteed by HUD. And that's even if the home value goes down, the credit line grows at the same rate. It's not tied to appreciation. It's only tied to age.
Well, actually, it's age at the start, but as age goes on, I mean, it's year by year. In fact, it's month by month. It's actually increased each month.
Yeah.
So, and I guess that it's 1/12. The fixed figure is 1/12 of the sum of those two.
Right now, it'd be increasing a little over 0.5% per month. And you can see that on the monthly statement. When I look at client statements, it'll show that monthly increase in their credit line.
Very good. Very good. And I did see that you had a slide there on silver divorce. If you can talk a little bit about more, that they had a article in the Wall Street Journal today talking about silver divorce and what people had done with their homes as they tried to work through one of those kinds of situations.
Well, I'd love to see that.
Yeah, I'd love to see that too. I'll have to look that up. Yeah, so the divorce rate is rising among people 50 and over. It's the only demographic with a rising divorce rate. 1 in 4 people today is over 50 getting divorced, and 1 in 8 of the divorces today are people at 65 and over. And I can attest to that, because I get phone calls pretty regularly from people in their 60s, 70s, and even their 80s that are getting divorced. And oftentimes one wants to keep the home, and they can use the retirement mortgage as a lump sum draw to buy out their departing spouse. And then that spouse that leaves the home and gets the cash payment for their share of the equity, they can use that cash payment as a down payment and use the retirement mortgage to go buy their next home. So you have 2 people who've divided their assets. They're going to have 2 homes that they own between them instead of 1. And nobody's taking on a mortgage payment, and nobody's taking money out of their existing securities portfolio. So it's really an incredible way to help people make that transition without decimating their, potential income and cash flow scenario. So that's one scenario, is one buys the other out, and then the one that leaves takes that money and uses a retirement mortgage to buy their next home. The other would be they sell the home, they each take their half, combine that with the proceeds from a retirement mortgage that will fund at the purchase of their new property, and they each buy a new home, again, with no monthly mortgage payment and not taking any cash out of their savings. Or I've even had people, and I've had more than one couple do this, which is kind of surprising. They keep the house, they get a HECM to pay off their existing mortgage and use loan proceeds to divide the house into 2 units, which in our area, in the Bay Area and California in general, is very easy to do now, to get permits to add a cottage or separate some of the square footage into a second unit. It's very inexpensive and pretty easy to do that. And so you can use the money for that, and then also use some of the proceeds to set up a life expectancy set aside to pay their property charges to cover property tax and homeowners insurance. So then you've got 2 people living in, each in their own half of the house that's been turned into 2 units, wiped out their mortgage payment if they had one, and set up a fund to have the lender pay their taxes and insurance for them for their life expectancy. So this way they can, nobody's had to pay moving expenses or find a new home, or they're splitting utility bills. It's surprisingly, like I said, it's Marin County, so people do all sorts of things that you might not do if you lived in another part of the country. But I've had several clients do that, and it actually works really well, if they're amicable. And then, the kids and grandkids come over and they're visiting everybody at once. So it works for some people.
Yeah. Well, and very good. And then if you could also go over to your slide, please, on your upcoming presentation, so people know about those.
So here's a summary of effective strategies, upcoming webinars. We're going to be doing one specifically on silver divorce. We've just rewritten the paper from the 2017 that was published in the Institute of Divorce Financial Analyst Journal. I don't know if that's going to be published or when, but we're going to do a presentation with the information. Use cases, we'll go into a deep dive of all the different ways you can use these loans. They're very strategic. And the fact that, it's easy to qualify and you don't have to make a monthly repayment, it's when you really start looking at it, it's kind of mind blowing what you can accomplish in retirement with these programs. downsizing, right sizing, using it as a buffer asset, staying in the home until one person passes, and using it for a liquidity tool to pay for care. And then in California, with it being a community property state, when one person passes, they get a full step up in basis. So, you know, they could sell a $10 million home that they paid $500,000 for once they get that full step up in basis and pay zero capital gain tax. So there's just a lot of strategies that you can look at, and we're happy to do a session with anybody to go over any cases that they want to talk about. And we do in-office trainings also.
Yeah, very good. Very good. Thank you so much, you guys, for what you do in this area. And we just thoroughly appreciate everyone attending today. And just a reminder that proof of CE will be emailed to you. But that's it for this webinar. Mary Jo, Barry, myself, and the rest of our team here with Mutual of Omaha Mortgage and the Retirement Resource Center, we thank you for being here with us today. Have a wonderful rest of the day, and we look forward to being with you again in the near future. Take care.
Thanks for your support. Bye-bye.
Thank you.